In this episode of the greatest podcast on dirt, we venture up to the Minnesota-Iowa border, a little town 20 minutes south of Jackson and just north of Spirit Lake, to talk with a sixth-generation farmer who didn't grow up at the racetrack but found himself there. He eventually would get to race on the tracks of PA, California, and Arizona, and last took laps in Texas. But a shift down to the deep south would bring a mixture of results. And what's happening now between the founder of the Bandit Outlaw Sprint Series and sanctioning body Power I is something that no one saw coming. So let's sit down with the man himself, fresh off of some shift work, and learn more about the story, the struggle, and journey of one Will Eggiman.
Will Eggiman into the lead. Swinging out down the backstretch. Out of Selinsgrove, New Jersey, he's your race leader in the 77. Mark Smith challenging for a redraw position. He takes it on the backstretch and caught him on. Smith is up to third. Mark Winkler in fourth. Krob Winkler's in that qualifying spot in the 5G. A mile to race for Will Eggiman. Final corner out of Selinsgrove, New Jersey. The 77.
Who the hell is Will Eggiman? Like, they just saw you out here throwing corn in a damn truck. What's the situation? Who are you? Who is this mysterious person sitting to my left? Y'all's right, my left. Y'all's right.
Yeah, I was born and raised here.
And we are in Jackson, Minnesota.
Jackson, Minnesota.
And has this racetrack always been here since you were here?
Yes, but obviously quite different.
Right.
So I grew up here, went to school here. When I got out of school, I started working for Agco.
Like Agco Jackson Nationals? Like,
yes.
Well, wow. So
yeah.
How long has Agco been here?
I should know the answer to that, and I'm probably going to get it wrong. But I think since
you can remember?
Yeah, sometime in the 60s, I think. You know, growing up, I think my family probably would have viewed the racing crowd as maybe a rougher crowd, a beer-drinking crowd.
Yeah, we integrated you.
But where I really started to get the bug was, well, let me back up. So at some point when I was I was probably 10 or 11, maybe 12.
Before the Agco, before anything.
Yeah, this was when I was a kid. One of my dad's coworkers invited me to go to a sprint car race at Jackson.
And had y'all known about it your whole life? Like, aware
I was
of it?
aware that the racetrack was there, but I had never gone to a race before.
Okay.
And so she was friends with Tim Munson. Tim Munson was a local driver, quite a good driver. He had his own car for a while. He drove for Woodkeys for a while. But anyway, I went to the racetrack with her, and Tim was racing that night. This was back when Jackson had
5/8 mile or whatever.
No, it was a half mile, but it had wooden grandstands with the roof over it.
Oh, kind of like fairground style.
Fairground style track. And so I went to the race.
Was it a fairground?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So went to the races with her, and Tim happened to do really well that night. In fact, I think he led a lot of the race. But
top three, kind of.
I was enamored by the racing. I was cheering and screaming and just was like infatuated with the racing. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And, you know, some of the things I remember was the the noise was so intense, and it would get captured under the roof.
Yeah.
And in those old grandstands, and I remember Tim was doing really well. He ended up basically wrecking out towards the end of the race, and I can't remember exactly why, but that certainly left a lasting impression on me as a kid. And I don't know how I acquired it, but I had one of his t-shirts. It would have been my first racing t-shirt or sprint car t-shirt, and I remember just thinking how cool that t-shirt was, as a kid. So that the first time I went, I was just in awe, but that was a one-off invite. And what I'm saying is, although that left a lasting impression, life happened and life moved on, and I just never really, especially during my growing up years, just really never had a chance to get back there. It wasn't until very early 20s.
So you're saying basically like a 10-year spurt.
Yeah.
From the first time you went
Mm-hmm.
to the next time you went again?
Yeah.
That's a lasting impression.
Yeah, I would have been very early 20s. So some of my coworkers were involved in racing, and
like crewing or
some of both. Crewing, a couple of the guys had cars.
modifieds or something, or sprint
I think the one guy in particular had a...
Because sprint cars has always been up here, right?
Yeah, sprint cars have always been kind of a staple at Jackson. They typically have run weekly. But the one guy had a stock car. The one guy was crew on a sprint car. Anyway, through building friendships with those guys there, I got the bug and had an interest in going back to the racetrack and checking it out. And at the time, I had an old 78 Ford pickup, and I built a push bumper, and we could get in for free if we would help push sprint cars. So it was me and a friend. Two people could get in for free if you would volunteer your time and services as a push truck. Well, that was pretty cool because we could get in for free.
And get on the racetrack.
We could park in the infield and
push race cars.
We could push sprint cars. And when the races were going on, we'd stand in the pickup bed, and we had a front row seat. It was awesome. So I did the push truck thing for a while. Well, then a buddy of mine, it was through work. He had a hobby stock car, and I decided that I was going to get into racing.
Not hobby stock, sorry.
Yeah, hobby stock.
You got a hobby stock?
Yeah.
What was a hobby stock back then?
Yeah, it was basically a street stock, but you were limited on the engine and limited on the suspension, and
so bust the windows out, put a cage in it, and go.
Yeah, it wasn't too much. It wasn't too far off from that. But so I built a car, and
this is your early 20s, 90s.
Yeah, me and some buddies, we went racing, and we were terrible.
What do you mean terrible?
Well, I remember, this is embarrassing to admit, but I remember one of the first nights we were at the racetrack, and we were unloaded, and we had started the car, and it was running terrible. And one of the competitors, he came over and he asked us to take the hood off, and to make a long story short, we had the spark plug wires on wrong.
Oh my God.
And so that's how green we were back then. We got better the next year. We built a better engine, and we got better with the car.
And this is before you could buy chassis and shocks and...
Yeah. We did have someone help us with the cage. I wasn't capable of...
But nowadays, it's Walmart, for stock car stuff.
Yeah.
Buy this chassis, buy this motor, buy this shocks and springs. And
Definitely.
then it was do it yourself.
Yeah. Well, in those years... I'll give you an example. My first car actually was hand painted. So it was before the...
Spray paint or with a brush?
No, when I say hand painted, I should have said hand lettered. Okay. So the lettering was done, somebody painted the lettering, like old school. Mm-hmm. So that was before the vinyl. I think the vinyl stuff was just kind of starting. But I always thought that was kind of cool. So the next year, we won some heat races and we got a lot more competitive. And then the third year, we kind of really started to put everything together. Came out, ran second the first night. I think we won the second night. We started to pick up wins on a regular basis.
And now you feel like you're a badass.
Well, I wouldn't say that.
I'm just saying, you're winning. You're kicking some ass finally.
So we were doing pretty well. We were leading the points. We had won 3 or 4 times by midsummer. And I got caught up in this claim rule. IMCA had the claim rule. And so...
Was it IMCA sanctioned?
IMCA sanctioned, yeah. And so a young competitor who was struggling like maybe I was the first couple years, he decided that he was going to claim my engine. I rejected the claim. And so I was disqualified. I had a fine and
suspension or whatever. You couldn't race again until you paid it.
Yeah. And I just never believed in the claim rule, and I'll tell you why. The claim rule on paper is a creative way to try and
regulate
level the playing field and to help save people money. The problem is in practice, it's used in the wrong way. People use it, if they have a grudge against somebody, they'll claim them.
Right.
If they feel like it's just, again, on paper, I think it
looks good.
It sounds good. It works. It sounds good, but in practice, it's shit.
It gets abused.
Yeah, it gets abused, and I hated it. So I rejected the claim. I got disqualified. So the very next week, we went over to Fairmont, which is 30 miles east of here. And I was just running Jackson. I couldn't really afford to go traveling.
Right.
But we went to Fairmont. So Fairmont was running the same rules, but they weren't IMCA sanctioned. So I started in the back. And keep in mind, a hobby stock race in those days was probably 12 laps. That was the feature.
Right.
So it wasn't
$200 to win.
Yeah, it wasn't like it was a big long race where you had lots of time to like work your way through the field.
Right. You start up front, you finish there.
If
you start at the back, you finish mid-pack, no matter if
I started in the back that night because I hadn't raced there and because I didn't have points. And so I was handicapped. So I started in the back. And I got up to third, finished third, which was an awesome run. I mean, we were going to the front. And anyway, that night, this was a week after I got claimed in Jackson, I got claimed again in Fairmont.
A buddy system deal, or?
At that point, I was a marked man. Everybody was like, what the heck?
This guy who worked at AGCO's kicking everyone's ass. This is bullshit, basically.
Yeah, and I think... To me, a lot of that was a little bit unfair because, I started off, I never had backing or money or an enclosed trailer.
You were just explaining how your first year you were lost.
We were lost. And
you went to work. Your hard work was paying off.
Yeah, it was paying off.
And people were pissing in your face on your hard work.
Basically, yeah. And so that was the end of my hobby stock racing.
What do you do after you're claimed out of the racing scene?
So
because you worked your ass off to be good, basically.
Yeah. So that winter we sold the car. It was easy to sell. Everybody wanted it.
Because you were the marked man.
It was,
your car's why you're a good driver.
Yeah. The engine I sold to a good friend, it actually ended up in a B mod. Which had, so basically it was a modified chassis, but with like a hobby stock engine.
Right.
But we made the decision that we were gonna race a sprint car, and we had no.
Hold on, how do you fucking go? Hold on, I gotta crack a White Claw for this one. What is the logical, sane, normal decision? Hold on, we're talking about racing. What is the decision in going from a hobby street stock to a sprint car?
I think if I was to really think through it, I think there's a couple things that probably played into that decision. One, I didn't want anything to do with IMCA. And all the other
Welcome to the rest of the world.
all the other classes at the time were IMCA.
Modified and everything.
And
else.
I was just really, really turned off by the claim rule. And that claim rule was across the board at the time. And it maybe still is. But I think the other thing was I was friends with some people who were involved with sprint cars. So there was definitely
some hand-me-downs.
So there was an influence there. And anyway, I bought a used car from a local team
that knew who you were.
Yeah,
from getting
and
claimed.
and they were willing to help me out. But then came time to get a motor, and to be frank, I couldn't afford a motor, and so I went.
What year are we talking about at this point?
This would have been
98.
My first year in a sprint car was 01. No, 02. 2002.
We're talking about the Dane Lasowski, Tony Stewart era.
So at the time, Jackson was running open-headed 360s.
That was her weekly class.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of the country had converted to ASCS style 360s, but I think Knoxville at the time was ASCS. But we were open heads, and then at the time there was a sanctioning body called WISSOTA operating in Minnesota and Wisconsin, and I guess maybe some in the Dakotas.
WISSOTA versus IMCA is a real fucking deal.
Yeah.
It's a real fucking
thing.
Well,
WISSOTA had a sprint car class back in the day.
I know IMCA did too, but they was like skinny wings, and
yeah,
they had it down in Texas. That was the big sprint car class in Texas at that time.
Yeah.
Was IMCA sprint cars, a little skinny wing 360 kind of situation.
So I couldn't afford an engine, so I went and talked to one of our local builders. I won't name his name because I'm not sure that he would want me to tell this story.
Right.
But basically just went and talked to him. I said, look, I can't do this deal from scratch. You know, is there another option? And basically we put together a lease deal. And so I was leasing an engine. I was paying him by race, paying him weekly. It wasn't cheap, but I didn't have to come up with this big chunk of cash
amount
to get an engine in the car.
So race.
Yeah. So all of a sudden, we were in the game. We had a sprint car, we had a sprint car motor, and we went sprint car racing. We had a decent season. I learned a lot. We had a couple really good runs. And then in 03 was kind of a weird year because Jackson made the decision that they weren't going to run sprint cars weekly. And so that forced us to do different stuff.
Tours and shit.
So I started to run a lot of the WISSOTA races. So we were running.
WISSOTA still had a sprint car.
Yeah,
deal.
WISSOTA was still running. So I was running Jackson when I could. We ran a couple times with the 360 against the 410s at Huset's.
How did that go?
We weren't competitive from a placing standpoint, but I think it was good experience.
Any good runs or?
Well, my best run of 03 was I won my first real sprint car race at Jackson in 2003. So that was probably the highlight of the season.
And that was a 360 race.
That was a 360. It came during what Jackson called its mid-season championship night. Also in 2003, I had raced enough with soda shows that I was Soda's Rookie of the Year in 2003. So, and I don't know that Soda ran sprint cars too many years after that. In fact, that might have even been the last year.
Well, the Soda sprint car deal sounds very
Soda
weird.
Soda basically ran the same rules as Jackson. So it was full-size wings, open-headed 360s, and they were real sprint cars, good cars, fast cars. So we came back, and Jackson went back to weekly racing in 04. 04 was kind of unremarkable. I was kind of out of money. I don't really remember that there was anything spectacular that happened in 04. I was just I didn't run a lot. It was just kind of a disappointing year. And then in 05, life happened, and I had an opportunity to go work for a company out east. So
Out east where?
Massachusetts. I drove out, and that weekend I purposely went through Pennsylvania and went through Williamsgrove.
Oh, you fuck.
And so Friday
So Harrisburg.
Yep. So I stopped at Williamsgrove. It was deliberate. I wanted to see the track. I wanted to see some good racing. And so that night, they were running 410s along with the URC
360
group. Yeah.
Shawn Michael must have been a big name.
Yeah. So URC back then was considered a club. So United Racing Club.
All right.
For a while, then they were United Racing Company, and then I think now they've gone back to United Racing Club. But United Racing Club, or URC, is actually one of the oldest sanctioning bodies in the nation. They're actually older than IMCA. Anyway, this is so unlike me because I tend to be a little bit introverted around new people, especially. But I introduced myself to the club president, John Zimmerman. I said, hey, I just moved out here. I've been involved in racing, and I'm wondering if there's any race teams that could use a hand. I just wanted to get involved. I was just hungry, just anxious.
And you just moved out to Massachusetts. You're in the middle of fucking nowhere.
I hadn't even officially moved yet. I was in the process of moving.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Like, you're trying to find something to do.
Yeah. I just wanted to touch a fucking race car.
Right.
So.
And you're in PA heaven. Had you heard about PA racing in Minnesota?
I think I had probably done some research online. That was in the early internet days. I had probably done some research and found maybe some message boards or whatever. So John said, he said, there's a guy, he travels alone with his wife. His name was Midge Miller. And Midge and his wife, Patty, are both gone now. In fact, Patty just passed a couple weeks ago. But he said they travel alone and they might need a hand. So I went over and introduced myself to Midge. And Midge was, I would say, a typical East Coast guy. Wasn't super friendly, in the Midwest.
Fuck yous kind of guy.
I just explained, I told Midge my story, and I said, hey, John said you might need a hand. And so Midge reluctantly allowed me to kind of hang out in the pits. And, I started off putting fuel in the car and doing some easy stuff. And he came in, I think it was after the heat race, and he wanted to throw the kitchen sink at the car. And it became apparent that he wanted to make enough changes that he was actually going to have to let me help. So he found out quickly that I knew my way around the car.
Okay.
And that not only did I know my way around the car, but that I was actually pretty good with the car. Yeah. And so that blossomed into a friendship that lasted. He was a very good sprint car driver. I would say that when I helped him, he was maybe a little bit past his prime at the time. But we had fun together. And so I helped him as much as I could. We went all over. And I was in Massachusetts for 3 years. Then I got transferred to Mexico. So I lost...
Well, hold on. You have this emotional investment into this race team. Mm-hmm. How the fuck do you go to Mexico?
So, the company I was working for in Massachusetts, they were a conglomerate. They had 12 facilities in North America, and that included 2 or 3 facilities in Mexico. I was starting to get the racing bug while I was there, and I actually went through Corey Kruzman's non-wing driving school.
Yeah. Yep.
And I actually had made arrangements.
What year is this?
This would have been in like 2011, 2012. I just am thinking about all this. So at some point, I want to say I was like in somewhere in there. I did a rent-a-ride from Jesse Hockett.
What?
Yes.
The VKCC?
No, so Jesse was running the VKCC, and who's the guy that owns the 13 Book?
Justin Peck.
Yeah, so
Tom Book.
Tom Book. Okay, so Tom was backing Jesse at the time.
Right.
But Jesse had his 77 car, which happens to be my number. Jesse had his own personal car that he was running in Missouri at local shows. Well, he decided that he was going to start renting his car out. So when he wasn't running the boot car or wasn't out on the road, he was going to do some rent-a-ride stuff. Jesse, I think his intention was to do his rent-a-ride stuff at his home track, where it was convenient and easy. Well, I saw...
Which would have been what? California? Double X? Missouri?
I want to say like Double X or something like that. Mm-hmm. But anyway, I saw a race on the schedule in Tucson. Anyway, I called Jesse or reached out to him and asked him if he'd be willing to rent the car, and he said he would. So we put together a deal, and I was down in Mexico at the time. Went up there, got my seat in the car, and it was an ASCS show. As the track slowed down and got slick, I just wasn't as comfortable, and I hadn't raced in a number of years, and just to be honest, really wasn't that good. Not to be a Debbie Downer, but Jesse died on my birthday like a year or 2 later. I can't remember what year it was, but that event will always be kind of special to me. I wish I would have gotten to know Jesse even better, but that was something that was kind of cool. And
this is while you, on the heels of having to be forced to move to Mexico.
Yeah, I was in Mexico. I drove out of Mexico and drove over to Tucson, which obviously wasn't a bad drive. I was going up to Paris just to watch races. I would go up and get a hotel room. It was just kind of a nice escape for the weekend. And then I was, like I said, I had gone up and gone through Corey's driving school. I got to drive both a midget and a non-wing car.
Ventura.
Yep, it was at Ventura. The non-wing car I drove was the 360. I got a job opportunity with the company, same company. I was with them for 13 years.
In Mexico.
I was working in Mexico. They said, hey, Will, we want you to come back to the East Coast. We have a facility in Jersey that's struggling, and it's your time, you're up. So they offered me a general manager position in New Jersey. So up until this point, I had been in upper management positions within the plants, but
right below.
But I was always reporting to the general manager.
And now you're going to be the man.
So this was my opportunity to have my own plant. So I moved back to New Jersey. That was the first opportunity since I had moved away from Jackson. This would have been like in 2012 to piece together a car again. Because at that point I was, I bought a house, I had a garage, I was making better money. I was in a position then to do some racing. So I did some racing then with URC off and on. So the company I worked for, they had a cargo van. It was an old Dodge, had a 318 V8 in it. And it had 2 seats in the front, nothing in the back. No shelves, it was just empty. Well, initially, to start with, that was my tow vehicle. So one of the challenges I had was when I was in Jersey, whenever I wanted to go into Central PA, I always had to go through Philadelphia. And it was just fucking miserable. But got through Philadelphia, got on the turnpike, headed west, got just outside of Harrisburg, and the oil pressure dropped on the old van. And basically I blew the motor up on the turnpike. So
Oh my God.
So here I am in this piece of shit van. I've got the sprint car on the back with the trailer. So anyway, I pull over on the turnpike. Luckily, and I don't even know why, but luckily I had AAA at the time. So AAA came out, or sent a tow truck out. It was a flatbed. They loaded the van up on the flatbed and hooked the trailer with my sprint car behind the flatbed, and he pulled me to a tow yard in Harrisburg. Well, on this particular day, I had left very early. I was anxious. I was ready to get to the track. So I get to this tow yard, and my initial thought was, okay, I got to figure out how I'm going to get home. And so I'm like, well, maybe I can rent a pickup and just tow my stuff home, and then I got to figure out what we're going to do with the van. So got someone from the tow yard to take me to a local U-Haul. Rent a F-150 from U-Haul. Go back to the tow yard, hook onto my trailer, throw all my gear in the back of the truck. I still have time to get to the racetrack.
Oh my God. No.
So
No.
I fucking head to Selinsgrove with a U-Haul pickup, all my shit in the back, my sprint car. I unload at Selinsgrove. I fucking win my heat race.
Oh my God.
Over Mark Smith.
Mark Smith? No.
I am dead serious.
No.
I'm dead. I have a video. I'll show it to you.
Oh.
I got out there. I held that fucker wide open the whole race.
You were pissed off, probably.
So I spent 13 years with that company, finished out my time with them in New Jersey, and decided to move closer, or decided to move to Texas in 2018 to be closer to my daughter. So made the move to Dallas and had my car. Was looking at different racing options. Obviously, ASCS had a few shows, and at the time, Sprint Car Bandits was operating down there.
Now, what was Sprint Car Bandits? Is that like your first intro to sprint cars in Texas, or
Yeah, so
the most regular deal happening?
yeah,
Which is an open motor wing sprint car deal.
well, back then it was 360s.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I chose to race with them primarily from a scheduling standpoint. Their races at the time were close to where I was living. They allowed engines up to 360 cubic inch. I had an ASCS motor at the time, so that was legal.
URC.
Yeah, URC was obviously
360s.
Yeah, URC basically ran ASCS rules. They did a little funky stuff with the restrictors in the stacks. They ran American Racer tires instead of Hoosier. There was some of that kind of stuff that was a little bit different, but in general it was ASCS rules. So anyway, I got down to Texas and I decided I was going to run some Sprint Car Bandits shows. That was kind of how I got introduced to Sprint Car Bandits, and then that was how, basically, that's kind of how I got introduced to them. So
you started racing with the Sprint Car Bandits. What happened from there? You moved from up there to down there for your daughter. You started racing with the series in Texas, which Texas racing scene is very different than most of the world's used to. What happened from there?
Well, so I don't remember if it was the first race I went to, but it was at Lone Star Speedway.
Kilgore.
Yep. Series director, I guess at the time, was Darren Short. So he made the announcement in the drivers' meeting that his partner Steve Lang was having some pretty serious health issues, and that they were looking for. So Steve was having health issues. He was going to take a step back from the series. I think his doctor kind of told him that he needed to stop going to the racetrack. So Darren was basically saying, hey, we're looking for some help with the series. Well, gosh, that sounded like something I might be interested in. And at the time I was thinking, maybe they want me to serve on a rules committee or make some phone calls to drivers, or I didn't really understand at the time what my involvement would be, but I was interested. I wanted to help. Not only did I have my own car, but I wanted to
do something.
I wanted to do something, get involved. So I called Darren, and Darren said, well, let's meet. And I also found out at the time that Darren had grown up here in Spirit Lake, Iowa. We made arrangements to get together. We had dinner. And Darren said, we're looking for someone that we can sell the series to. And I was like, ooh, that's not what I thought was going to be discussed. But to make a long story short, we basically ironed out a deal, and I said, you know what? I want to do this. I want to jump in. So I ended up buying the series in July of 2018. And Darren stayed on as a contract employee. Darren continued to be an important part of the series. And we worked together to close out 2018. In 2019, I ran the series with my own car. And I actually...
You raced and promoted?
So...
How did you operate as the owner and drive?
Well, I had employees. So I had, Darren was helping with website, with Facebook, he was doing some announcing. He was helping with behind the scenes, management of the series. And then at the racetrack, we had key people doing tech and scoring and that kind of stuff. And that freed me up then to race my own car. So we had a really good year in 2019. Picked up 3 wins. Picked up the points championship. We were really, really solid that year. But during 2019, one of the things that the series was struggling with is we were really struggling with consistency from an officiating standpoint. In particular, the starts. So I hired a flagman to come in, and I said, "This is your baby."
Who's your flagman? Tony?
No, I'm not gonna name
Will?
names. No, I'm not going to name names. I don't want to dog on anybody.
Okay, fine. I just love the hey guy, but keep...
Yeah, so I hired a flagman to come in, and with the mission of, he was empowered to make the calls on the starts and to clean that up. And we just never could get, I'm not saying our events were completely off the rails. They weren't. But it seemed like every week there was some sort of jump start or something that happened that people were upset about, and it was just frustrating because I was spending good money on a flagman and we just couldn't gain any consistency. So as we moved into 2020, I felt like I needed to take a step back and do more of the competition directing. And so I moved up to the booth, and I was actually basically calling the shots. So didn't really matter who was flagging. I was the one who was judging the starts, making the calls, working the radios, and basically governing the race. And I'm not saying we were perfect right out of the gates, but we created a lot more consistency that way going forward than what we had in 2018 and 2019.
So that's 2020.
Mm-hmm.
You're running this series, Sprint Car Bandits.
Mm-hmm.
What happens then?
So, end of 2020, we collectively made the decision, and Darren was a part of this, a big part of this.
The original seller, technically at the dinner, he sold you.
So Steve Lang and Darren originally co-founded the series in late 2015, and I think the first year that they raced was 2016.
Mm-hmm.
So they ran the series in 2016 and 2017, and then I picked up where they left off, or where Steve left off, in 2018. So I've owned the series since 2018. So 2018, 2019, 2020.
Sprint Car
Bandits. The decision was made at the end of 2020 to rename Sprint Car Bandits Outlaw Sprint Series. And
what was the reasoning?
The biggest reason was to incorporate the Outlaw name and to really create value for our track partners. We just felt like that the use of the name was, from a promotional standpoint, added value. And at the same time, we opened up the engine rule. We felt like with the wing and with the tire rule, which remained unchanged as we moved into 2021, was enough to equalize the field regardless of what they had for power. And for the most part, that's absolutely true. So we saw amazing parity among engines of all different sizes.
Kind of like the Elite.
Yeah, but I think with the wing and the tire rule, I think the open engine rule, which allowed us to say we truly were outlaw from a series standpoint, I actually think with our wing and tire rule helping level the playing field, I think it actually maybe works even better in our series than maybe it does in some of the other situations. So we had a number of races where 360s, 305s, and 410s were competitive on the same track. We didn't see any 410 wins in 2021. 360s were owned most of the wins in 2021, but 305s also won some races in 2021.
Texas Slick.
So the parity among the engines was really, really good.
Right. So that was 2021.
That was 2021. So then in during the off season,
you had a good run.
Yeah, we had a what I would say would be
you had the XR stuff at TMS. You had big names, Swindells, Crockett's.
Yeah, I would say 2021 was kind of a breakout season. So then as we moved into the off season in 2021, Steve Lang, who was the co-founder,
Who originally sold Boss or Sprint Car Bandits?
he's the one who Steve and Darren co-founded Sprint Car Bandits. Steve got sick. He handed over the reins to Darren. Ultimately, I bought the series from Darren. So Steve wasn't directly involved with the series in 2021, but I talked to Steve regularly.
Okay.
And it wasn't uncommon for me to call Steve and just bounce ideas off him.
Right. Mentorish.
Yeah. So one of the things that Steve and I had talked about is Steve said, well, why don't you consider working with a larger sanctioning body? They can help you with sponsorship. They can help you with broadcasting. They can help you with media. They can help you with some of the things that maybe you don't currently have access to. So I said, maybe that is a good idea. So he encouraged me to talk to Kenny Brown of Power Eye. So
What year was this?
this was between 2021 and 2022.
Okay.
So
Off season of 21.
it was off season, yeah. So I had some conversations with Kenny Brown, and
And they were trying to start like a 410 deal at that time, right? Power Eye.
I think
Power Eye was.
yeah, I think Kenny actually officially started that in 2022. He was just thinking about it, or planning to do something, or wanting to do something when he initially reached out to me. So we had some discussions about working together. During the initial discussions, I was trying to visualize what a collaboration would look like. In other words, I can offer you this, you can offer me this. There's an exchange of benefits. But it became evident during those discussions that Kenny wanted to buy the series. And ultimately, Kenny wanted to buy the series
Because
and
of the work that you had done. You had a rapport in that area.
I think Kenny saw that. I think Kenny felt like the series had value. I think he felt like the series could be expanded into other areas. And he was definitely interested. And so he explained to me that if I was to sell a series, he would most likely have Steve, who had put some of his health issues from 2018. Steve was on the mend. His health was improving. He was going to have Steve then basically run the series in the Texas area. And so we went back.
So basically a deal where he would buy it under the Power Eye brand.
Mm-hmm.
And just take the reins, kick you out of the whole situation, and Lang would become like the general manager of the situation.
Or director of competition.
Right,
or
series director, blah,
Yeah.
blah, blah.
Yeah. So if you don't... So Kenny Brown...
And that idea, that kind of perception was 2021.
This was between 2021 and 22.
2022,
To be
okay.
exact, this was in September of 2021. So we were either done or just finishing out our season in 2021.
Okay.
In fact, I don't think we had run TMS yet. I think this
So this kind of idea for Kenny Brown, I think it is, with Power Eye to come in and take your shit and just buy you out, put Lang in, and just take over what you had done for years.
Well, yeah. So Kenny, if you know anything about Power Eye, so if you look at Power Eye's website, there's a whole bunch of different classes
Right, midgets. They have all kinds.
A whole bunch of different series names that are operating under the Power Eye umbrella. He wanted to buy Bandits Outlaw Sprint Series
From you.
From me.
Because you were running and operating everything.
Yes. He wanted to buy the series and bring that into his conglomerate, his group of series.
His regime.
Yep, exactly. Yep. So,
you said yes at the time, or?
No. So Kenny and I went, so the conversation turned from how can we collaborate to I want to buy the series.
Okay.
And so we talked back and forth about some numbers, and we talked about some details. It was mostly phone conversations. And at some point I said, Kenny, the next step is for you to put something in writing. Some sort of a purchase agreement, some sort of an offer letter.
And this is the off season of 21.
Yeah, this was still in 2021. And so Kenny agreed to do that. And several weeks went by and I didn't hear anything from Kenny. And during that period, I had a bit of a falling out with Darren. I think Darren was looking at the deal with Kenny and possibly Steve as
like a rekindling.
Yeah, kind of a rekindling, but I also think Darren felt like there was better opportunities for him working with or for Kenny and Steve than working with me. And that's fine. Darren might have been right about that. I don't know. So, but during those conversations, it became apparent to me that Darren was not only pushing me towards trying to sell to Kenny, but Darren was clearly having conversations with Steve behind the scenes. And I started to get really uneasy about
the vibe.
Yeah, I started to get really uneasy about the deal. And it got to the point where I just didn't trust Darren anymore. And I didn't feel comfortable with the deal. And if I'm being 100% honest, I didn't want to sell the series. So I told Kenny the deal was off. I didn't want to sell a series. He had never submitted anything in writing. And Steve and Kenny were upset. I think they thought it was going to be a done deal. I think they had even started talking to drivers and maybe even some racetracks. And so when I backed out, they were really upset.
So what did 2022 look like for Boss?
So before we get to 2022, I made the decision then to part ways with Darren. I just felt like we were moving in two different directions. And
did he become sour when you wouldn't sell? Like, did he become pessimistic?
I think Darren was upset that the deal didn't go through. And again, I think he felt like those guys were a better bet for him personally, and I get it. So anyway, I parted ways with Darren. I picked up the pieces quickly. I reached out to all the racetracks. I said, look, here's the deal. Darren has exited the business. Darren had been the front man in a lot of those relationships, and so I took over and I said, hey, Darren's out, but I'm here. We're going to move forward. We're going to do a good job for you guys. And we put together an awesome 2022 schedule. And in addition to that...
With the open motor and
yep,
everything.
under the boss name. Yep. And in addition to that, we built a brand new website. We had My Race Pass build us a new website. And we, the website was integrated with our scoring and with our lineups. And I felt like we were raising the bar from a series standpoint. So we moved into 2022. We started the season off at Lone Star. That was kind of a weird deal. Lone Star is under new ownership now, and I actually promoted that race myself. So I leased the track from the owners and did my own promotion. We had a full field of cars. We didn't get as many fans as I wanted, but we made it through that first race.
This is 22.
This is 2022, so this is just this last season.
Right.
So we started racing, and it was a struggle. It was just on the heels of COVID. Gas prices were high.
Every excuse in the world for a racer to not show up.
Yeah. We had some really good races in 2022. We had some really good car counts.
What tracks?
So we ran at KSP, we ran at Waco, we ran at Lone Star. We were supposed to run at I-30. That race got rained out. We were supposed to run at 67. I can't remember where else we raced.
Well, Boyd? RPM?
No, we
Devil's
didn't.
Bowl, Super Bowl?
Oh, yeah, we ran at Devil's Bowl for the first time. That was an awesome event. Wish we would have had more cars, but we had what was really cool about that event is we had a great crowd in the stands. Probably their second best crowd behind their Outlaw show. So that was really cool to see. I was really thankful for that. And then we headed into our summer break, and so we, over the last few years, we've been taking the month of August off just because it gets so hot. Well, and it's so hot down there.
You got to worry about Elite. How did Nathan Moore? They got their own non-wing open motor deal. It's the same thing almost, feels like.
Yeah. So when I did the scheduling in 2022, I had created a shared schedule that had any sprint car date, whether it was in the region or even outside the region, that might impact our ability to draw cars. I had all those dates on the calendar, and I was working with Nathan on the shared schedule. And so when we came out of the gates in 2022, both Nathan and I had full schedules, but almost no dates on top of each other. And our hope was that by cooperating and collaborating, that not only were we doing a better job for the racetracks, but that we were giving those race teams who wanted to cross over from non-wing to wing or vice versa, we were giving them an opportunity. Instead of being forced to choose where they were going to go for the weekend, they could run both series. And so we definitely had some support from some of Nathan's guys, and some of Nathan's guys, or some of our guys went and raced with Nathan also. So, but we had made the decision a couple years prior to that we weren't going to run in August, primarily from it just was so hot. So we had 4 or 5 races on the fall schedule then for last year, and we got into the fall season, and we had a 2-day show at 67. 67 closed. We lost a 2-day show there. We lost a 2-day show at TMS. So TMS basically canceled their whole season.
Canceled the racetrack at this point.
Yep. So we lost a 2-day show there. That would have been, a big event for us. And then we lost an event at Lone Star.
Didn't you start 2022 with a traveling race to Vegas?
Yes, forgot to mention that. Yep. So we had a race out in Las Vegas. that was kind of a mixed basket. We had the racing actually was really decent, but we just needed more cars there. And our rules package is polarizing for some race teams, and some of the guys that ran there last year, so that race would have just happened here within,
the year.
Yeah. But some of those guys, they wanted to run again this year. And one of the things that I asked them was, I said, so let me ask you this. Because last year, I think the rules package was kind of unfamiliar to some of the race teams out in California or whatever. And so the one guy that, and I'm not going to put him on the spot, I won't name names, but he's a prominent car owner, runs a lot of West Coast stuff.
Charlton?
No. Not going to name names.
Oh.
But anyway, so he called me, he said, hey, are you going to run again in January in Vegas? And I said, well, I'm not sure, but I said, let me ask you a question. I said, if we were to go back, I said, what rules package would you prefer? Would you want to do Boss? Would you want to do ASCS?
360 West Coast.
Would you want to do, true outlaw type rules? He said, Will, he said, to be honest, he said, I had no issue with your rules last year. And so it was his way of saying, let's run Boss rules. And, unfortunately, we didn't have a chance to do that again this year. But what was cool was to hear from him. So, and I think back, Chaz, even when I first got down to Texas and ran my very first Sprint Car Bandits race, I was really skeptical about the rules too. I had been running ASCS type rules out on the East Coast and back home, but they work. And so anyway, 2022 was a struggle. And when we closed out the year 2022, I just made the decision that I was going to idle the brand in North Texas. And primarily because I'm living in Minnesota now. And it just has become too difficult for me to do a good job of running the series down there and obviously living here. I did a lot of going back and forth over the last couple of years, and so my plan and my goal is to continue to look for opportunities to do some promotions, but
with the Bandit Outlaw
with the
Sprint
Bandits
car.
Outlaw Sprint Series, but do it more up here. So I don't want to disrupt anything that's already working up here. But if there's a racetrack or an area or a group that, for some reason or another feels left out,
Disenfranchised.
I think the Bandits is a good series that could potentially fill that void. And it definitely caters to a grassroots group, and so that's something that I've been looking at.
But I see recently, I saw on Facebook how Power I now runs Boss.
Well,
I literally saw a post that says Bandit Outlaw Sprint Cars or Series. They're saying they own it. What's going on?
Well, I think to understand what they're attempting to do, you have to go back to the interest that they showed in the series between 2021 and 2022. So
right, you were talking about how they wanted to buy it. It
Yep.
wasn't about collaboration.
Right.
It was about them wanting to take it over.
Yep.
You denied them.
Yep. So Kenny Brown and Steve Lang, so Kenny Brown was the potential buyer. Steve Lang was going to be involved in some way, shape, or form.
You're talking about the same Steve Lang who had to give this up to you.
Yes. Yeah. So when I rejected their offer, those guys were upset. I think Kenny Brown saw value in the boss name. He saw value in what we were.
Well, it's not just a value. It's
what
something
we
that
were
you've
doing.
worked on.
Yep.
You built a brand.
And Steve Lang, I think, probably never wanted to get completely out. I think the health issues that he was having in 2018, they kind of came along unexpectedly. And, I think watching me work with the series probably was hard for him. He wanted to be there. He wanted to be the front man. He wanted to be involved. So they were upset over that. And when I wouldn't sell to them, they decided that they were going to go off and do their own thing.
Well, their own thing isn't the Bandit Outlaw Sprint Car Series. What are you fucking talking about?
So what I believe to have happened is Steve Lang went out and created a DBA using the Bandits Outlaw Sprint Series name.
But that's what you came up with.
Yep.
You created that.
You've
ran it for 2 years.
We've been using that name to conduct business for 2+ years.
Right.
He created the DBA to try and basically injure.
Hold on. DBA stands for doing business as.
Yes.
If you're not doing business as, how can you even do that? You've been doing business as for 2 years. How is that possible?
Well, I think what makes...
How can he do that? Why?
I think what makes what Steve did even worse is sometimes in business, it's not uncommon for someone to choose a business name that might already be in use. And eventually, maybe the original person finds out and they figure out, oh, that was an accident, and one of them is forced to change their name or whatever. But what really makes this bad is that Steve Lang absolutely knew that I was using Bandits Outlaw Sprint Series to conduct my business, but he chose to create the DBA anyway. And I think Steve's hope was that I would just roll over and basically not do anything about it. And so then Steve went and sold that DBA on paper, allegedly, to Kenny Brown of Power Eye. What makes this incredibly bad for Kenny Brown,
the owner of Power
Eye, is that Kenny Brown knows that I'm already using Bandits Outlaw Sprint Series to conduct my business and have been for 2 years. So they have a problem. And it's very clear that I use the name first, that I am using the name. My website, my Facebook page, every single post over the last 2 years, my hashtags, my t-shirts, everything has been under the Bandits Outlaw Sprint Series name. So this isn't a mistake.
This is criminal.
This isn't a mistake. They did this on purpose. They are deliberately trying to basically steal the name.
Basically. I mean, it sounds like it's still.
Injure my business. And it's really unfortunate because they Kenny Brown is already operating a 410 series that he started up in 2022.
He attempted. He didn't do well.
Well,
What are you going to do about this?
Well, where we're at right now is I have reached out to them, both Kenny and Steve, and I have said, look, I'm conducting business using this name, and I've basically said, you need to stop using this name. Unfortunately, I haven't heard anything back from them. I've got a lot of time and a lot of money invested in the Boss brand.
You built a brand.
Yep. And so I guess my message to them is, number one, I'm not just going to roll over. I'm pursuing all legal avenues to protect my property.
What you built.
Yep. And my message to anyone involved with Power Eye, if they're confronted with the Bandits Outlaw Sprint Series name under the Power Eye umbrella, I would discourage them from participating until this is resolved. If you're a track partner of Power Eyes, if you're a racer, if you're a sponsor, the Bandits Outlaw Sprint Series the name is not for sale. It's not their name. They didn't start the name.
Start it, build it, or make it.
Yep. And so I would encourage anyone who's participating with Power Eye that if they're confronted with that name, stop.
This is how we ride. This is how we